Hi, I am Mr. Shoaib. First of all, just video it, information, visited another hospital in Kiev. He also spoke virtually in front of Germany's government, accusing them of failing to live up to their responsibility. Meanwhile, after calling Vladimir Putin a war criminal on Wednesday, President Biden had even tougher words for the Russian leader. Today you have Ireland and Great Britain, and you know the Republic standing together against a murderous dictator, a pure thug who is waging an immoral war against the people of Ukraine. Tomorrow Biden is set to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and it's going to be a big one, according to U.S. Secretary of State Lincoln. The White House is concerned that China may be considering assisting Russia with military equipment. With that, let's bring in NBC's Cal Perry live for us in La Vie. Cal, the sun is just coming up after 5 a.m. where you are. Tell us about these attacks on civilian targets. Is there a noticeable pattern in what's getting hit? There is, and in the last 24 hours that pattern is they're hitting the lifelines that civilians rely on, whether it's medical facilities or food storage facilities. Those have been the attacks, and that's been the thread that we've seen in the last 24 hours. Starting in Mariupol, we know Russian soldiers are embedded inside the main hospital in that city. There are 400 patients in that hospital, as well as now 500 Russian soldiers who are using those patients as human shields. They are avoiding fire and they are denying people medical care. If you go a little bit to the north in the city of Kharkiv, there was a Target today. That is the main marketplace, the last place in that city that is still functioning to sell food. That marketplace on your screen now almost completely and totally burned down. In the city of Charnev yesterday we had a line for bread and an actual bread line, including in the last 24 hours the death of a U.S. citizen in that city from, we think, shelling, and also again the targeting of civilians as they're leaving these areas and the targeting of these food networks. The situation is so bad in some of these cities that we continue to talk about the inability for civilians to even go above ground. Here's a little bit more of what the U.S. ambassador to the UN said today on that. Take a listen. Local officials have told families to leave their dead relatives lying outside on the streets exposed to the world because it is simply too dangerous with the bombs and shellings to hold funerals. And so what you have is a military invasion that is slowing, that is stalled, that is in many ways ineffectual, and so they are taking it out on these civilian populations in the most brutal ways, denying people food, denying them water, denying them the ability to bury their loved ones. Stephanie, I mean, this is devastating for Ukrainians, but tell us about Russian losses, because the Ukrainian army is standing strong. Yeah, absolutely. We heard just a few hours ago from the Deputy Prime Minister here in Ukraine, who said she was working with the Red Cross to organize the transfer of 14,000 dead Russian soldiers, but then in the last 3 hours we had that new address from the president here in Ukraine saying that he is wondering what he is supposed to be doing with 13,000 dead bodies of Russian soldiers. The video on the left part of your screen. This is that column, that 40-mile-long column that was stalled outside Kiev, and what you're seeing there are drones, Turkish drones, strafing those columns, causing heavy losses that were supposed to be prevented by simple jamming techniques that the Russians don't seem to be carrying out. The other thing that we're noticing in places like Stephanie is that dead Russian soldiers, their bodies are remaining in the streets. That's another pretty good indication. Not just that they're taking heavy losses, but that they no longer have the command and control structure in some of these places to recover the bodies of those fallen service members. Stephanie, but just think about that. Ukrainians are being told, leave your dead family members outside in the street. It's not safe to do anything else. Well, Ukraine and the Red Cross are working to send the bodies of Russian members of the military home. Just think about that. Cal, thank you so much for your reporting tonight and every day. With that, I want to bring in our experts this evening. Phil Rucker, Pulitzer Prize-winning deputy national editor at the Washington Post, retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. He's the former director for European Affairs for the U.S. National Security Council with his expertise in Ukraine, and Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at the CIA and the Pentagon. Jeremy, I turn to you first. Russian forces thought they would crush Ukraine's military within a week, but Russia has clearly stalled, and now there's $1 billion in U.S. military aid coming to Ukraine any day now. Can you speak to what's next in this fight? Absolutely, Stephanie. I think the battle for Kiev is shaping up to be not only one of the most consequential battles of the 21st century, but maybe the most consequential fight since the Battle of Britain during World War I in 1940, because what Ukraine is having to contend with are Russian aircraft trying to bomb and strafe civilian targets across the city. Lay siege, as Richard and Cal reported, to the city, cutting off key lifelines. And if the Zelensky government can hold on and stay in power and continue to operate from a command and control position in its own capital city, I think that will create essentially a long-standing war of attrition, a standoff between Russian forces and Ukrainian forces, and I think what this is shaping up to be, Stephanie, is World War II and a half, not yet World War III, not yet all-out nuclear confrontation between Russia and the West, but something that probably will not be contained just to the borders of Ukraine, and we're looking at a conflict across Europe that will last for a very long time. Well, let's talk about what's happening in Russia, Colonel Venman. Because Putin is framing it to his people that Russia is just protecting itself, but how can they believe that when the attacks aren't even happening on Russian soil? Well, I think part of this is a cognitive dissonance, this idea that they've bought into Putin, they've been backing them for about 20 plus years, and they're not going to turn their back on them when the country's at war. They've been propagandized so heavily that large swaths of the population believe this is a righteous, justified war. One of Russia's good wars, or the Soviet Union's good wars, where they're unprovoked or they were dragged in reluctantly. Of course, we know that's not true, but that's what the Putin regime has sold the population on. I think those blinders, the sum of that rationalization, is going to start falling by the wayside as the costs of these sanctions start to be felt by the population. Those are going to start to unfold over the course of the coming weeks and months, and that's going to cause socio-economic protests, not these small-scale political protests, anti-war protests. And then, of course, these 14,000 potentially 14,000 dead Russian servicemen coming back. That is a catastrophic number. I do believe that the estimates of 7,000 are low. I think we've reported those as the lower end of the spectrum. The Ukrainians might be a little bit heavy, but I think it's probably much closer to what they're reporting than the low end, and that's a devastating number of casualties pouring in, something that's going to be hard to contend with because these are military bases with lots of service member families around them. Next up, urban centers. These are not kind of remote locations in the middle of nowhere in most cases, so I think that those blinders are going to eventually come off and create some significant pressures on Vladimir Putin, who's a callous individual. He doesn't care about Ukrainian life, he doesn't care about his Russian soldiers' lives, but he does care about his own personal well-being, and these things are going to start to weigh down on them. Well, his own personal well-being, or at least his ego, has been hit this week. President Biden speaking out, calling Putin a war criminal and a murderous dictator. What's the White House saying about that? Well, Stephanie, they're saying that was sort of a visceral reaction by President Biden yesterday, but he reiterated, he doubled down on that characterization today, and we also saw Secretary of State Anthony Blinken today saying that he agrees with Biden's characterization of Putin as a war criminal, and what this has done is it's personalized this war and this conflict between these two leaders hereby then from the of course and Putin, and it frames what's happening. The atrocities that are happening to civilians all across Ukraine is the personal act of President Putin in a way that in some ways, cases at least rhetorically, escalates the criticism from the US and from Biden, and so we'll see where that develops tomorrow when Biden speaks with President Xi of China on the phone, a very consequential conversation in the geopolitics here. But clearly Biden has had enough with what he's seen in terms of the images of the losses of life. Let's stay on those very specific atrocities, Jeremy, because I said it before, the UN has estimated that more than 700 civilians have been killed, including 52 children, and the truth is the number is likely a whole lot higher. What does the military need to do specifically to fight back against these attacks on homes, hospitals, schools? Two things, Stephanie: shoot down Russian aircraft, and second is take out Russian artillery, mortar and rocket positions that are showing these civilian locations, and to do that the Ukrainians need precision targeting. That means that they need intelligence, that also means that they need surface-to-air missiles and air defenses, the likes of which President Biden alluded to yesterday, and Pentagon officials talking on background explicitly stated that the U.S. and NATO forces would be providing the Ukrainians. This is absolutely critical for the Ukrainians to deny Russia the ability to dominate from the air. Colonel Arnold Schwarzenegger released an emotional video urging Russians to tell Putin to stop the war, specifically Russian soldiers, many of whom don't even know why they're there and what they're fighting for. I know you fact-checked this call to action, and you said he's got some pretty convincing arguments. I want to share a bit of it. What do you think of that message, and how important is a celebrity, specifically one like Arnold Schwarzenegger, to Russians? He's not just any celebrity, he's frankly one of the most respected celebrities in the world, and he's somebody that has long ties with the Russian people going back many years as a movie maker. As a bodybuilder, he has a unique kind of cachet with the Russian people, and he's speaking from a place of concern for this population. Of course, he has deep concern for the Ukrainian population also that's suffering, but This is all about persuading the Russian people to take the blinders off to the reality of the situation, to for Vladimir Putin to recognize that it's his war to end. He's the one that started it, and of course there's the component of this, his remarks that are geared towards the Russian soldiers operating as the other belligerents conducting these offensive operations by telling them that they're the ones that are giving up their lives for Putin's war. So I think this is a unique message that's gone out through multiple different channels, including Telegram. It's reverberating somewhat through the Russian-speaking world. Of course, the Russians are trying to knock it down with their censorship, but it's one of those things where it's picked up enough traction where it's getting repeated consistently. And it's going to be hard to kind of prevent this viral message from reaching the intended audience. Some people will listen to it, some people will not see it. There's enough there they'll dismiss it as Arnold being kind of manipulated or something that nature, but I think it's going to have some sort of effect. It's hard to ignore Arnold. Before we go, Phil, just take us back to the White House. How concerned are they about China potentially helping Russia's military? Very concerned. There was a warning from the Secretary of State Blinken today that if China were to help Russia to either provide military aid or some other form of assistance, financial or in terms of other assets, that the U.S. would seek to punish China for that. You can expect, I would imagine, President Biden to reiterate that message when he speaks with President Xi tomorrow morning Washington time. But look, China has been or has tried to position itself as a neutral arbiter here in this war, not taking sides against Russia, trying to preserve the trade relationship that it has with Russia. And the U.S. obviously would like to see China apply some more force to try to convince Putin to back down and to convince Russia to back away from Ukraine. We'll see if by them successful in that endeavor tomorrow, but clearly the U.S. is trying to put some pressure on China not to take any steps further to assist Russia to provide any kind of military aid or other financial assistance. Gentlemen, thank you all so much for sharing a bit of your expertise with us this evening. Phil Rucker, Alexander Vinman, and Jeremy Bash. From where I sit, diplomacy requires both sides engaging in good faith to de-escalate, and I don't see signs right now that Putin is prepared to stop. On the contrary, if you listen to just, for example, his most recent remarks yesterday, that suggests that he is moving in the opposite direction. So far, diplomatic efforts to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine have failed. As we mentioned earlier, President Biden will speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping tomorrow after the U.S. warned China against helping Russia in Ukraine. With us tonight to discuss former NATO Deputy Secretary General Rose Gotha Muller. She is the highest-ranking civilian woman in NATO's history. She was also a chief U.S. negotiator of the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty with Russia. Rose, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. We know that Putin and Xi Jinping have a close relationship, but what matters more to China, the U.S., which is the largest trading partner for the whole country, followed by the European Union, or a relationship with Putin? Yeah, she has a tough balancing act. He's really walking a tightrope right now, because this war of Russia with Ukraine is not a winner for China, and I think she is trying to figure out exactly how to continue to balance between what he's pledged to Russia not so very long ago. He and Putin had a great meeting right before the Beijing Winter Olympics started, where they pledged strategic partnerships. So he's pledged Putin, but in the end of the day he wants those trading relationships with the European Union, with the United States, and he doesn't want the sanctions against Russia to impinge on those trading relationships. So he's in a tough spot right now. Let's say China does decide to back Russia militarily, how much stronger does that make Putin's hand? Honestly, I really don't think he's going to dive into a big-time military project to support Putin's adventure in Ukraine. It just doesn't make sense for China, where they put their emphasis is on Taiwan and seeking the independence of Taiwan. If anything, now the strong Western sanctions action against Putin and against Russia for this invasion of Ukraine is probably